These are selected scenes from the 109-minute-long Roadster Body Part 2 DVD. Check out all the Covell DVDs at covell.biz. Hello, I'm Ron Covell. In my last DVD, I built this buck for a 27 Ford Roadster Body. Now we're going to start shaping the panels to fit the buck. And I'm going to start at the rear. The rear portion of this body is called the turtle deck, and I'll make each piece to fit the turtle deck in this DVD. I'm going to start with this panel in the very rear. The panel that fits the buck here has an 1¼ inch flange on all 4 sides. So I need to start with a blank of metal wide enough to give me that flange. So I've added an 1½ inch extra material on all 4 sides of this blank, and I'll be shaping it with the English wheel. The fit is coming along. I still need a little more curve in both directions. I'm going to start wheeling in a different direction now. The first passes were front to back and right to left. I'm going to wheel diagonally now. This should start smoothing everything out. I've been wheeling this panel in several different directions, and I think we're getting close to the final fit now. I'll slide this back so we can check the contour on the front edge, and it seems to match the contour of the buck in that area quite well. On this edge we have a very good match. Looking at the back edge, just light pressure will bring it back to match the buck nearly perfectly in the back. And on this side, again, we have nearly a perfect match. So the shaping on this panel is pretty much completed, and now we can get into flanging the edges. It's essential to use a clamping block for any hammer forming operation, and I've made this clamping block from 2 thicknesses of MDF that are glued together. The reason for using 2 thicknesses is so I have good footing for the clamp. What the clamping block does is it retains the shape of the metal underneath it. My goal is to hammer this flange down, and with no clamping block, the metal in this area would actually rise up above the buck. So this is holding it nice and tight, and I'll start the hammering operation. It's pretty easy to form a flange when everything is clamped tightly like you see it here. It will take a little bit of hammer and dolly tune-up, but I'm very pleased with the way this panel has shaped up. The next panel is the one above the deck lid. I call this the tulip panel. And this has a challenge because it's a reverse curve. It's convex from right to left, but concave from front to back. And it's a 2-step process for me to make this curve. The first step is to put the concave part in it. And I'll do that by using the low crown wheel on the English wheel, pushing the panel into the machine, and then when I pull it toward me, I put a little downward pressure on the panel. And this will curl the edge of the metal. Okay, I'll try this on the buck. And it looks like the contour front to back is pretty good at this point. And now I'll start working on the contour in the other direction. For the next step, I'll use a lower wheel with more crown to it. This is the 5½ inch radius wheel, which matches the contour of this station perfectly. I'll put this in the machine. For this step, I'll turn the panel upside down and wheel across the panel from side to side. I've spent a few more minutes working on this edge, and I think I have plenty of curl in it. I'll try it on the buck to see how it's coming. And it does seem to match the contour of the stations very well. And also you can see the contour from right to left is pretty close. So I'm ready to start smoothing this panel out. So I've gone back to the low crown wheel in the machine, and I'm going to start wheeling in this direction to smooth things out. I've spent about an hour fine-tuning the shape of this panel, and I'm very pleased with how it's fitting the buck at this time. You can see it matches the contour on the back just about perfectly. The contours on the side stations is just about perfect. And the next step is I'll flip this upside down and look in through the windows on the back side of the buck to make sure it's matching the shape of the intermediate stations as well. And if everything looks good there, then we'll get ready to do the edge work on this panel. Everything's clamped in place, and I'll be using a larger Delrin plastic caulking tool for this edge. I've used a low crown hammer to smooth the flange out by hammering it tight against the buck. So this back flange is completed. Next I'll do the flanges on the ends of the part. So I've done just a little bit of hammer and dolly work on these flanges to get them absolutely smooth and flat. And as you can see, they've come out to be absolutely beautiful. So this panel is essentially finished. Now let's get on to making the turtle deck sides, which are a very complicated project. So here's the finished bead, and as you can see, it came out absolutely beautiful. A bead like this could be made with a beading machine, but it's really kind of a big production to make tooling for a beading machine to do a large bead like this. The tooling for a reciprocating machine like the dig is much easier to make. This is the turtle deck side that we blanked out earlier, and I'm getting ready to do the edge work on this. You'll notice I've trimmed out the wheel well opening. I did that primarily so we'll have a good place to clamp this down. And also you can see I've drilled holes for alignment pins. And these alignment pins are crucial. They keep the part from shifting on the buck. This edge is oversized quite a bit, and I want to trim it back so that when it's formed, it comes just a little bit past the edge of the center part of the turtle deck side. I have everything clamped up now, and we're just about ready to go. I'll be doing this piece a little bit differently. I recently borrowed this air chisel with a special plastic nose piece from a friend of mine, and I'm going to use this to shape the metal down over the buck. I'll do the shaping on the top third of this part first, and the metal in this area will have to stretch. You can see it's shaping up very nicely, and I have just one small section to do, so let's get going on that. I think you can see that pneumatic hammering tool really does a beautiful job, and of course it's much faster than using a traditional hammer. I have these panels all clamped together now in preparation for welding, and in fitting these together, of course, I was certain to align our marks on both panels, so I'm sure I have the proper alignment from front to back. And everything looks like it's fitting perfectly, so I'm going to go ahead and put tack welds on these panels. All the tack welds are in place now. Next, I'll take the clamps off and hammer and dolly this joint in preparation for the finish welding. So this joint has been carefully hammered and dollied from one end to the other, and what I'm looking for at this stage is a nice flow of contours between one panel and the next. The weld is finished, and I'm pretty sure I got a nice full penetration weld on the whole joint. I'm going to flip this over and make a fusion weld on the back side, mostly just to blend together the back side of the weld. I won't be adding any more filler rub, but just smoothing out what's there. So I've meticulously metal finished this entire surface, and I think you can see it's come out to be a beautiful shape. So it's finally starting to look like something. Using the same techniques I used to build the first turtle deck side, I've made a second for the passenger side of the car. And I've joined them together with the upper panel and the lower panel. So now for the first time I can really check to see how these pieces fit together. And with just a little bit of adjusting, they're fitting perfectly. So I put the deck lid buck into place, and again I'll check its fit to make sure that all the contours match. Everything's looking wonderful. So I'll start shaping a piece of metal to match the contours of the buck for the deck lid. Let's try this panel against the buck to see how it fits. I put a small sheet metal angle on the bottom edge of the buck so I can hook the metal under it and it will stay in place. And now with a straight edge, I can measure the contour I've achieved by wheeling. And you can see that it has a lot of doming from right to left. It has domed up nearly an inch in the center, which is way more than the finished panel will need. But it does not have enough contour from top to bottom. So watch what happens when I press this down tight against the buck. So now I have the contour I need from top to bottom, but look at how that's modified the contour from right to left. Look at how much that's flattened it out. So now I'm very close to having the 1/4 inch of doming I need at the bottom edge and the 5/16 of doming I need at the top edge. So I will work this more on the wheel, but from this point on, I'm going to be just smoothing out this panel, working out any of the small defects I can see in the contour. I don't need to dome it any more deeply. And once I have it completely smoothed out, then I'll show you how I take the stress out of this panel so it will lay against the buck without having any pressure needed on the top. I'm using Clecos to temporarily hold the deck lid skin into place, and I want to check it out thoroughly before we go any farther. I want to make sure that all of the contours on the deck lid are uniform, that it doesn't have any high spots or low spots, and that looks great. I want to make sure that all of the edges fit properly, and they're looking very good. And most importantly, I want to make sure that the contours of the deck lid blend in evenly to the contours of the turtle deck, and everything is looking really nice. So the next step is to start flanging the edges of the deck lid, and I'm going to be using a different technique to do that. So I've shrunk the edge. Let's try it against the buck and see how it fits. And it looks like the contour matches perfectly. So I'll fit the deck lid into place. And what I'm looking for at this stage is the contour of all 4 edges and the width of the gap. I want to have a uniform gap on all 4 sides. So if I should see any places where the gap is too wide, I can use a hammer and dolly to move the flange outward to close up the gap. And if there were a spot where the gap was too tight, again I could use a hammer and dolly to push that flange in. And I would do that adjustment until I have a uniform gap on all 4 sides. Well, it's taken a lot of work to get to this point, but now all of the outer panels of the turtle deck are completed, and I couldn't be more pleased with how it's come out. The techniques I've used to make these parts can be used for any project made of multiple panels with compound curves, and I've shown you a broad assortment of techniques to do the shaping, plus the edge and detail work. This is the second in a series of DVDs that will cover each stage of the body construction. This will include building the front portion of the body, the inner reinforcing structure, the doors, all of the hinges and latches, the firewall, and tying everything together. It's been a pleasure to share my personal project with you, and I hope it will offer you inspiration for your own projects. So until next time, this is Ron Covell signing off. Learn metalworking and welding from a master. Covell DVDs, the standard of the industry.